The morning mist hung thick over the waters of the James River, curling and twisting like living spirits across the marshlands. The air smelled of salt, earth, and the faint, distant smoke of a fire that had been burning since dawn. In the distance, the shapes of canoes appeared, gliding silently over the glassy surface, carrying figures whose presence seemed almost spectral against the pale light. This was Virginia in the early 1600s, a place not yet claimed, a land still breathing freely under the watchful gaze of its native peoples, where every rustle in the reeds and every distant bird call was a story waiting to be told, a secret waiting to be unearthed. Among these stories, one figure stands apart, luminous in memory, yet shrouded in mystery, a young woman known to history as Pocahontas. Most of us know her through the comforting veil of myth, a smiling, brave girl who saved a single Englishman, who danced lightly through the pages of history, immortalized by storytellers and films. But those stories are thin and fragile when held against the weight of truth, the kind that whispers through old letters, faded journals, and the shadows of long-forgotten houses. The real Pocahontas was no mere girl of legend. She was a bridge between worlds, a living symbol of union and survival, and perhaps, if one dares to look closely, a key to a lineage whose implications stretch far beyond the rivers and forests of Virginia. Consider the audacity of it. A native princess, captured by English colonists, baptized under a new faith, and sent across the ocean to the court of King James I. Her journey was not merely a matter of diplomacy or spectacle. Every step was laden with significance, subtle cues, and whispered meanings that most historians have either missed or chosen to ignore. There are gaps in the record, deliberate omissions, perhaps, or simply the way history favors the visible over the hidden. But in those gaps lie possibilities far stranger than fiction. Possibilities that hint at connections between this young woman and a web of secrecy, stretching from the cloister halls of European noble houses to the myths of a legendary bloodline said to be forbidden, sacred, and closely guarded. This bloodline, known in whispers as the Grail lineage, is one of the most tantalizing threads in all of history. Its story weaves together kings and commoners, priests and warriors, saints and sinners. According to legend, it descends from figures so revered that their names are almost unutterable in polite company. Some claim it flows directly from the blood of a figure whose life and death changed the course of humanity. Others insist that over centuries, it became fragmented, scattered into secrecy, protected by societies sworn to ensure that no one outside the inner circle could ever trace its path. And yet, here we find ourselves on the shores of Virginia, watching a young woman whose presence seems, at first glance, entirely natural in her environment, yet whose very existence might have carried the echoes of that same forbidden lineage across the Atlantic. It is in this space between what is recorded and what is concealed that our story begins. There's an almost imperceptible tension in imagining Pocahontas, not only as a historical figure, but also as a potential vessel for something far older, far more mysterious. The English colonists recorded her life in fragments, often through letters and reports that focus on political advantage or curiosity rather than truth. She is called princess, daughter, bride, diplomat. Rarely, if ever, is she described as a woman of profound symbolic significance. And yet, if we peer through the lens of esoteric history, a pattern begins to emerge. The alignment of her life events, the unusual interest of influential Europeans, the timing of her arrival in England, all of these become threads that might connect a native girl of the Powhatan Confederacy to a story centuries in the making, a story that the world has long been denied. Imagine the forests of Jamestown as more than wilderness. Imagine them as a stage for subtle political maneuvering, ritual, and secret alliances. Imagine Pocahontas moving through these spaces not only as a participant in the daily life of her people and the English settlers, but also as a figure whose very blood might have been recognized in hidden circles as carrying extraordinary significance. The idea may seem preposterous at first. After all, mainstream history paints her story in black and white: captured, baptized, married, voyaged to England, and died far from home. Yet, once the surface of this history is scratched, a deeper, shadowed layer comes into focus, one where lineage, power, and sacred knowledge intersect in ways deliberately obscured from ordinary records. Even the land itself seems to remember. The rivers that carried her canoes, the forests that sheltered her people, the open fields where she might have walked in silence. All of it holds memory. And if we are willing to listen closely, we can hear it. The faint hum of stories that were never meant to be told, of connections that defy conventional understanding, and of a young woman whose life may have been entwined with the pursuit of a secret older than the English colonies themselves. And so, the question arises, why does the story of Pocahontas resonate not only with romance and heroism, but also with the shadowy corridors of myth and secrecy? Why do certain researchers, genealogists, and esoteric historians whisper of her possible ties to a bloodline so revered and so feared that it was systematically erased from the pages of history? Could it be mere coincidence, the meeting of two distant worlds? Or is there something far more deliberate, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those patient enough to trace its path? As the mist lifts over the river, revealing the first rays of sunlight glinting off the water, it is easy to forget that history often hides more than it shows. The tale of Pocahontas is far richer, far stranger, and far more layered than the surface allows. She may have been a daughter, a wife, a princess, and a diplomat. But what if she was also something more? A living nexus between two worlds, a silent custodian of a forbidden legacy, a figure whose blood and story are a key to mysteries that transcend continents and centuries. And so, we begin a journey that moves through time and space, through rivers, forests, and forgotten archives, tracing the shadows of a legend that has refused to be fully forgotten. From the mist-shrouded waters of Virginia to the courts of England, from whispered European prophecies to modern revelations of genealogy and blood, this is the story not just of a girl, but of a lineage, a mystery, and a secret that has endured for centuries. We begin here, at the edge of the river, with Pocahontas, not as the world expects, but as she may truly have been, a living thread in a tapestry that stretches beyond history, beyond legend, and into the very heart of the forbidden. Pocahontas. The name alone conjures a vivid image. A young girl running freely through the untamed forests of Virginia, her long hair flowing behind her like the wild rivers she called home. We see her in the images that history has painted, a princess of the Powhatan people, the daughter of Chief Powhatan, her spirit as untamed as the land around her. In the mainstream story, she is the innocent savior, the one who bridged two worlds in an act of compassion, reconciling native and European cultures. But history is rarely so simple, and the Pocahontas we think we know is more of a construct than a person. To understand Pocahontas in her full depth, we must strip away the comforting myths that have surrounded her. What do we actually know about her life? The facts are sparse, and each piece of recorded information invites more questions than it answers. Pocahontas was born around 1596 in the Chesapeake Bay region, likely not far from the banks of the James River. Her real name was Amanuda, and Pocahontas, meaning playful one, was a nickname, perhaps a reflection of her youthful energy and spirit. But this was no carefree child. Pocahontas was a daughter of power, and her father, Powhatan, was the ruler of a vast confederation of Algonquian tribes. His influence extended over much of the Virginia coastal region, and his people were well aware of the European settlers encroaching on their lands. The English colonists at Jamestown, in their quest to establish a foothold in the New World, had already begun to clash with the native peoples, who saw them as an existential threat. Pocahontas's first recorded interaction with the English came in 1607, when she was around 11 or 12 years old. It is said that she saved the life of Captain John Smith, preventing him from being executed by her father's warriors. Or did she? This well-known tale is riddled with inconsistencies. Smith himself later claimed that Pocahontas had intervened to spare his life, but there is no corroborating evidence of this dramatic moment, and Smith's own account was far from reliable. Some historians believe that Smith's story was exaggerated, crafted to fit a narrative of personal heroism. In any case, the truth of their relationship, if indeed one existed in the way Smith described, remains murky. The notion of Pocahontas as a savior is, at best, a romanticized version of events. At worst, it is a historical distortion that serves to simplify the complex and often violent interactions between the English and the Powhatan Confederacy. The reality was far darker. Pocahontas's people were caught in a struggle for survival against an invading force that would eventually decimate their lands and culture. Pocahontas, as a young girl, witnessed these tensions firsthand, and it's likely she understood, even at that age, the stakes of her people's struggle against the growing English presence. The story we're told by conventional history, however, is much more sanitized. After her supposed act of mercy, Pocahontas faded into the background, becoming a symbol of peace and harmony between the indigenous and European peoples. But in 1613, when she was around 17 years old, Pocahontas was captured by the English during an expedition to trade for corn. The events that followed marked a dramatic shift in her life. Rather than being a savior or an innocent bystander, Pocahontas was now a captive, a pawn in a political game between her people and the English. The English, led by the ambitious Captain Samuel Argall, saw in her a valuable asset. By capturing Pocahontas, they hoped to leverage her as a means to force her father, Powhatan, into submitting to their demands. It was during her captivity that Pocahontas underwent a profound transformation. The English saw it as an opportunity to civilize her, introducing her to Christianity and European customs. She was baptized in the Church of England, adopting the Christian name Rebecca. There is a deep irony here, one that resonates with the broader colonial project. Pocahontas, a powerful symbol of native resistance, was being reimagined as a symbol of colonial success. But this was no simple conversion. Pocahontas's forced assimilation into English society was an act of profound cultural erasure. Her name, her identity, her connection to her people, all were being replaced by a new narrative, one shaped by English interests and designed to serve their colonial agenda. And yet, this very moment of forced transformation set in motion a series of events that would propel Pocahontas into the heart of English society. In 1614, she married John Rolfe, a tobacco farmer who had found his own way to profit from the land. Their marriage, often portrayed as a union of love, was in fact more a political maneuver than anything else. Pocahontas's marriage to Rolfe was seen by the English as a symbol of the success of their colonial project. The idea that even a Native American could be converted and integrated into English society. It was a message of submission and compliance, a symbol that colonial dominance could, in time, be made to appear both peaceful and civilizing. However, this was a marriage of necessity, not one of romantic passion. Pocahontas, though likely fond of Rolfe, was still, in many ways, a prisoner of circumstance. She was now part of a system that sought to control not just land and resources, but identity itself. By marrying Rolfe, she had become a tool of the colonial narrative, a living, breathing symbol of the civilizing mission. The story of Pocahontas's marriage to Rolfe has, over time, been heavily romanticized. But what is rarely discussed is the immense pressure that Pocahontas must have felt as she navigated the treacherous waters of English society. She was now a woman torn between two worlds, one that claimed her as a symbol of colonial success, and another that had been ravaged by that very colonialism. Her ties to her people, though undoubtedly still strong, were severed by both geography and circumstance. In 1616, Pocahontas traveled with Rolfe to England. It was here, in the heart of the English Empire, that the true complexity of her situation began to emerge. Pocahontas was paraded through the streets of London as a living example of colonial success. She attended court, met King James I, and became something of a curiosity, a symbol of the English project in the New World. But even here, among the highest ranks of English society, Pocahontas was not entirely at ease. She was far from home, surrounded by foreign customs, and her own identity was being obscured by the layers of colonial narrative that had been imposed upon her. Tragically, Pocahontas's time in England was short. In 1617, just a year after arriving, she fell ill and died unexpectedly in Gravesend. The exact cause of her death remains a mystery, but it is likely that the stress of her life in England, combined with the conditions of the journey, played a role. Pocahontas's death, much like her life, was marked by contradiction. She was, in the eyes of the English, a symbol of the success of colonialism. But in her own heart, she had been torn between two worlds, a daughter of Powhatan and a woman of England, never fully belonging to either. Her story, as it has been handed down to us, is one of loss and transformation. But the loss is not only her own. It is the loss of a much deeper connection to the land, to her people, and to the ancient narratives that had guided them for centuries. In many ways, Pocahontas's life was a tragic illustration of the cost of colonialism, of the erasure of native identities, and of the profound cultural dislocation that was forced upon those who lived through it. Yet if we look beyond the sanitized version of Pocahontas's story, we begin to see something else. Could there have been more to her life, her marriage, and her legacy than we have been told? Could her place in history have been tied to a far older and more powerful story? A story that spans centuries, continents, and bloodlines? This is the question that lingers, unspoken, beneath the surface of her life, and one that we must explore further. The story of Pocahontas cannot be fully understood without acknowledging the world into which she was born, a world that existed long before the English colonists set foot on the shores of Virginia. The Powhatan Confederacy, the political and cultural network of which Pocahontas was a part, was a complex and highly sophisticated society. Far from the primitive image often painted by European settlers, the Powhatan people had a rich cultural and spiritual life, with traditions that stretched back thousands of years. These were not the naive and innocent savages that colonial narratives would later portray them to be, but rather a people who had developed intricate systems of governance, trade, and spiritual practice. At the heart of the Powhatan Confederacy was Chief Powhatan, Pocahontas's father, a powerful and influential leader who ruled over a confederation of more than 30 tribes along the Chesapeake Bay. Powhatan's domain was vast, encompassing fertile land and a variety of resources that made the region both highly coveted and fiercely protected. He was a shrewd and calculating leader, known for his ability to navigate the treacherous waters of diplomacy and warfare. His interactions with the English settlers, though often cordial on the surface, were marked by suspicion and tension. Powhatan understood the threat that the English posed to his people, and he knew that their presence in the New World was not merely a matter of curiosity or trade. The English were a colonial power, and they sought dominion over the land. For Pocahontas, growing up within this complex and often volatile political environment, the English settlers were more than just strangers. They represented an existential threat to her people's way of life. And yet, despite the tensions between the Powhatan people and the English, Pocahontas was chosen, or perhaps fated, to serve as a bridge between these two very different worlds. To understand this, we must first consider the role that Pocahontas played within her own culture. In Powhatan society, women held significant power and influence. While the men were warriors, hunters, and political leaders, the women were the keepers of the land, the nurturers of the community. Pocahontas, as the daughter of Chief Powhatan, would have been raised with an understanding of the delicate balance between diplomacy and warfare, between the sacred and the worldly. She was not a passive observer of the events unfolding around her. She was a participant in the intricate dance of power that defined her society. But Pocahontas' life was about to be irrevocably altered by the arrival of the English. From the moment they landed at Jamestown in 1607, the settlers had made it clear that they intended to dominate the land, not simply to coexist with the native peoples. They brought with them diseases that decimated entire populations, advanced weaponry that gave them a decisive military advantage, and a worldview that sought to reshape the world in their image. The Powhatan people, in contrast, saw their relationship with the land as one of balance and respect. The English, however, viewed the land as something to be conquered, tamed, and transformed for their own purposes. In the face of this existential threat, Pocahontas' role as a mediator, a symbol of peace and goodwill, took on a new and far more critical dimension. It is said that she first encountered the English colonists when she was around 11 or 12 years old. According to the legend, Pocahontas saved the life of Captain John Smith when he was captured by Powhatan warriors. The circumstances surrounding this event are still debated, but one thing is clear. Pocahontas' actions, whether driven by compassion or pragmatism, marked her as someone who could navigate the delicate and dangerous political landscape between her people and the English. What is often overlooked in this telling, however, is the power dynamics at play. Pocahontas, even as a young girl, was already a figure of great importance within her tribe. Her actions were not simply those of an innocent child. They were those of a skilled diplomat who understood the stakes of the struggle between her people and the English. Her intervention on behalf of Smith, whether it occurred in the way Smith described or not, represents the first of many moments in her life where she would find herself straddling two very different worlds. But Pocahontas was not merely a passive participant in the colonial narrative. The more we look into her life, the more we begin to see the subtle hints of something much more significant, something that has been obscured by history. Could it be that Pocahontas, in her actions and in her very bloodline, was a key figure in something much larger than the colonial conflict between the Powhatan and the English? Could she have been, unknowingly, connected to an ancient and powerful lineage, one that stretched far beyond the shores of Virginia, to the heart of European mythology and mysticism? This is where the story takes an intriguing turn. As we explore Pocahontas' life and the forces at play during her time, we begin to notice an uncanny set of connections, not just between Pocahontas and the English, but between Pocahontas and the deep, secretive undercurrents of European history. Could it be that the Powhatan Confederacy, in which Pocahontas was raised, was not as isolated as we might think? Could there be a hidden connection between her people and the ancient bloodlines of Europe, including the legendary Grail Bloodline, whose existence has been whispered about for centuries? The idea that Pocahontas might have been connected to such a bloodline may sound like an extravagant claim, but there are those who suggest that her life, and even her very existence, is tied to a much older and far more enigmatic story. The Grail Bloodline, according to certain esoteric traditions, is said to be the line of descent from Christ himself, a line that has been carefully hidden, protected by secret societies and powerful figures throughout history. And if we look closely, we begin to see the first hints of this connection in Pocahontas' life. Pocahontas' journey from the wilds of Virginia to the courts of England is not just the story of a captive Native American girl, but also a journey into the heart of a much older and more mysterious narrative. When she was taken to England in 1616, Pocahontas was not just a curious figure to be paraded before the English court. She was a living symbol of the tension between the old world and the new, a woman caught between two cultures, two ways of life, two realms of power. The very fact that she was brought to England, met with King James I, and paraded through the streets of London suggests that there was something about her that was recognized by those in power. What was it that made Pocahontas so significant to the English? What was it that drew them to her, beyond her exoticism or her perceived innocence? Was there a deeper, hidden meaning behind her presence in England? A meaning that went beyond the political and cultural dynamics of the time? As we begin to unravel the threads of Pocahontas' life, we come to realize that her story is not just one of tragedy and assimilation, but also one of mystery and hidden knowledge. She may have been, unbeknownst to herself, a key player in a much larger game, a game that spanned continents and centuries, and whose true significance has been lost to history. This is the mystery we must seek to uncover. The connection between Pocahontas, the Powhatan Confederacy, and the Legendary Grail Bloodline. Could Pocahontas, in some hidden way, have been a link in this ancient chain? The answers, if they exist, are buried in the shadows of history, waiting to be brought to light. And as we delve deeper into her story, we will discover that the lines between history, legend, and esoteric truth are often far blurrier than we could have ever imagined. As the English presence in the New World grew stronger, so too did their knowledge of the Native American peoples, including the Powhatan Confederacy. For Pocahontas, this knowledge wasn't just academic, it was survival. Her encounters with the English would shape her fate in ways that were both visible and hidden, propelling her into a world far beyond the forests and rivers of her homeland. Yet, amid the political intrigue and cultural clash, there lies a subtle thread that connects Pocahontas' life to a much older, more esoteric narrative. This thread, often overlooked by traditional historians, is deeply tied to the secrets of ancient European bloodlines, particularly those associated with the Holy Grail. To understand how this thread may weave through Pocahontas' story, we must first explore the notion of the Holy Grail, an idea that has captivated imaginations for centuries. In medieval legend, the Grail was more than just a cup or vessel. It was a symbol of divine power, a link to the bloodline of Christ, and a vessel of profound, often secretive, knowledge. This mythic relic was said to have been hidden away, guarded by a select group of individuals who were tasked with ensuring that its power did not fall into the wrong hands. Over time, the Grail became more than a mere religious artifact. It became the key to understanding a hidden lineage, one that stretched back through the earliest days of Christianity and, some believe, even further into pre-Christian antiquity. This bloodline, tied to the Grail, is said to be a direct descent from Jesus Christ, carried through his descendants in secrecy, away from the prying eyes of history. For centuries, this idea remained the subject of whispered legends and coded texts, hidden within the walls of monasteries and the chambers of European royalty. The connection between this hidden bloodline and Pocahontas, at first glance, may seem far-fetched. However, a closer inspection of the events surrounding her life reveals a network of connections that suggest her story may be more than just an isolated chapter in colonial history. In order to connect these seemingly disparate threads, we must look beyond the simple narrative of Pocahontas as a native woman caught between two worlds. Pocahontas' father, Chief Powhatan, was not just a leader of his people, but also a key figure in a much larger ancient story. His people, the Powhatan, were deeply spiritual, and their practices were interwoven with the sacredness of the land itself. To them, the earth was not merely a resource to be exploited. It was a living entity that held profound meaning and significance. Many of the Powhatan's ceremonies and spiritual practices reflected a belief in cosmic forces that govern the balance of the world. It's within this context that Pocahontas's role becomes increasingly intriguing. When Pocahontas was taken captive by the English in 1613, it wasn't simply an act of war. It was also an act of spiritual displacement. Pocahontas, who had once been at the heart of a society that revered nature and the sacredness of the earth, was now caught in a world where religious and political ideologies were centered around control, conquest, and dominance. She was forcibly baptized and given the name Rebecca, marking her physical and spiritual transformation from a native woman to a symbol of English civilization. But in the eyes of many who were privy to the deeper currents of European mysticism, this was not just a conversion. It was an alignment of Pocahontas with something much greater, something tied to the ancient European mythos surrounding the Grail. The English were aware of the mystical significance of bloodlines, particularly the idea that the Grail bloodline was meant to remain hidden, preserved only for those deemed worthy to protect its secrets. In the years leading up to Pocahontas's capture, there were rumors circulating within the courts of Europe about the discovery of this hidden bloodline. Some sources suggest that European nobility, particularly in France and England, were actively seeking to uncover the Grail's secrets. This pursuit would culminate in the rise of secret societies like the Knights Templar and the Rosicrucians, both of which had deep ties to the preservation of ancient knowledge. Could Pocahontas, in her own way, have been seen as a link in this ancient chain, a hidden piece of the Grail puzzle, connected to a much larger story? At the time of Pocahontas's capture and subsequent assimilation into English society, the English monarchy had long been aware of the political and symbolic power of bloodlines. Royal marriages were often arranged with the intention of securing dynastic continuity, but they were also about maintaining control over powerful secrets. The marriage of Pocahontas to John Rolfe in 1614 was not simply a romantic union, as history often portrays it, but a politically motivated move, one that had deep symbolic significance. By marrying Pocahontas, John Rolfe, who was himself connected to the English elite, was not just marrying a woman from the New World, he was connecting himself to a legacy that was rooted in both native and European worlds. In this sense, Pocahontas's marriage was not just a symbol of peace, but also a symbolic union of two powerful bloodlines, one of which was believed to carry the divine legacy of the Grail. The court of King James I, where Pocahontas was presented in 1616, was deeply entangled with the politics of bloodlines. The English monarchy had long been obsessed with the idea of divine right and royal lineage. When Pocahontas arrived at court, she was not just a native captive, but also an intriguing, almost mythical figure, someone who bridged the gap between the indigenous people of the Americas and the ancient dynasties of Europe. The very act of Pocahontas's presentation to King James and the aristocracy was a symbolic performance of the merging of these worlds. And though it might seem that Pocahontas's role in this moment was purely passive, there is a deeper layer to her story that suggests otherwise. The historical narrative of Pocahontas's time in England is often framed as a curiosity, an exotic spectacle meant to entertain the English court. Yet, in the context of a secretive world of European mysticism and royal intrigue, her presence in England could be seen as part of a much larger and more mysterious plan. Was Pocahontas brought to England because of her symbolic significance? Was she chosen not just because of her ties to the Powhatan people, but because of her connection to something far more ancient? In the days leading up to her untimely death in 1617, Pocahontas's life was marked by a series of unsettling transformations. She was no longer simply a native woman from the forests of Virginia, but a living emblem of colonial conquest and the erasure of native cultures. However, as we begin to peel back the layers of her story, we see that Pocahontas was also a key to a much larger puzzle. one that spans continents and centuries. Her bloodline, her marriage, and her connection to both the indigenous world and the English courts suggest that Pocahontas may have been far more than a historical footnote. She may have been a vessel of hidden knowledge, a symbol of the merging of ancient, secret traditions. Pocahontas' death in 1617, at the young age of just 21, is a tragic end to a life filled with transformation and mystery. But in many ways, her story did not end with her death. The legacy of Pocahontas, as both a symbol of colonial peace and a link to an ancient lineage, has continued to capture the imagination of those who seek to understand the hidden currents of history. Was Pocahontas simply a victim of colonialism, or was she, in fact, a crucial figure in the unfolding of a much larger and more enigmatic narrative, one tied to the mysteries of the Grail, to ancient bloodlines, and to a secret history that remains buried beneath the surface of the past? When Pocahontas journeyed to England in 1616, she was not just a native woman from the distant shores of the New World, but a spectacle. Her presence at the court of King James I was a calculated move that carried much more significance than we often recognize. Pocahontas was presented as a symbol of the success of English colonialism, a civilized native who had been transformed by European values and Christianity. But beneath the surface of this political presentation, there were layers of mystery and intrigue, suggesting that Pocahontas' journey was not simply a colonial victory, but part of a much larger, more profound narrative that was being played out on the world stage. The English court of King James was not only a center of political power, but also a place where ancient secrets were sometimes hidden in plain sight. Many of the aristocrats and nobles in attendance at the royal court were well aware of the powerful symbolism of bloodlines, especially in relation to the legendary Grail and the sacred dynastic traditions that surrounded it. The Grail, according to certain esoteric traditions, was not merely a cup or a relic, but a symbol of divine bloodline, a lineage that could trace its origins back to Christ himself. The pursuit of the Grail and the secrets it contained was not just the domain of knights and religious figures, but had deep connections to the royal families of Europe. It is at this point in history, with the tension between the old world and the new, that Pocahontas' role becomes all the more fascinating. Her presence in England was not just a diplomatic gesture, but potentially a key moment in the ongoing quest to uncover and protect the secrets of the Grail bloodline. Many historians and esoteric scholars have suggested that the royal families of Europe were deeply involved in secret societies, some of which were founded with the specific purpose of guarding ancient knowledge, including the truth about the Grail. The Templars, the Rosicrucians, and other secret orders were, in their own way, connected to this hidden lineage. Was Pocahontas, with her unique position as both a native woman and a symbol of colonial conquest, somehow tied to these secretive movements? When Pocahontas arrived in England, she was not just an object of curiosity, but a carefully crafted symbol. Her conversion to Christianity, her baptism, and her new identity as Rebecca were not merely personal transformations. These acts had deep symbolic meaning, aligning her with the Christianized European world, while also distancing her from her native roots. Yet, the very act of her conversion and transformation into a proper Englishwoman may have hidden a deeper purpose. Could it be that Pocahontas was more than just a symbol of European victory over the native populations? Could she have been a living representation of the ancient bloodline that some believed to be connected to the Grail? This idea is further supported when we look at the circumstances surrounding Pocahontas' marriage to John Rolfe in 1614. At first glance, this marriage may seem like a typical colonial transaction, a way to seal peace between the Powhatan and the English settlers. But upon closer inspection, it appears to have a far more profound significance. John Rolfe, a tobacco planter in the English colony, was a man of modest means, but connected to a network of influential people, particularly in England. His marriage to Pocahontas was not only a political move to cement a fragile peace, but also a deeply symbolic act. By marrying Pocahontas, Rolfe was uniting two worlds, native and European, and intertwining their destinies in a way that may have been seen as part of a larger, more mystical design. There is an underlying theme that connects this marriage to the idea of ancient bloodlines. The notion that the union of Pocahontas and Rolfe was not just the merging of two cultures, but also the blending of two powerful legacies. Rolfe's connection to the English court, and perhaps to secret societies within that court, suggests that Pocahontas's marriage to him may have had much broader implications than the historical narrative lets on. Was this union, in fact, a form of symbolic protection for the Grail bloodline? Could it have been a way for the hidden knowledge of this sacred lineage to remain preserved, concealed within the very blood of Pocahontas and her descendants? This idea becomes even more compelling when we consider the timing of Pocahontas' journey to England and her subsequent marriage. The early 17th century was a period marked by a heightened interest in esoteric knowledge, particularly in Europe. The Rosicrucian manifestos, which called for the revival of ancient wisdom and the establishment of a new spiritual order, were circulating at the time, and secret societies were beginning to make their presence known. The Templars, once disbanded in the early 14th century, were rumored to have resurfaced in clandestine circles, and their connection to the Grail legend was central to their mystique. Could Pocahontas' marriage to Rolfe have been part of this larger web of intrigue? Was it a deliberate attempt to hide the true significance of her bloodline? Or was it, in fact, a way to ensure its survival by embedding it within the power structures of the English court? In this context, Pocahontas was not just a naive native woman. She was a figure of immense symbolic importance, caught between two worlds, but also at the very center of a hidden, ancient story that had been unfolding for centuries. It is also important to consider the symbolism of Pocahontas' name change. While it is often seen as a mere Europeanizing of her identity, this name change carries deeper significance. The name Rebecca, given to Pocahontas upon her conversion to Christianity, was associated with a biblical figure, the wife of Isaac in the Old Testament. In Christian symbolism, Rebecca was a matriarch, a figure tied to the themes of lineage and inheritance. Could the name change, in this sense, have been a deliberate act of encoding Pocahontas within the larger Christianized narrative of divine right and sacred bloodlines? Was Pocahontas' rebirth in England meant to reflect the symbolic rebirth of an ancient lineage, one that was meant to survive through the centuries, hidden in plain sight? When Pocahontas died in 1617 at the young age of 21, the historical narrative was quick to close the book on her life, marking it as the tragic end of a noble native woman who had been caught between two worlds. But what if her death, far from being the end, was actually a transition, a passing of the torch to future generations who would continue to guard the secrets of the bloodline that Pocahontas had unwittingly embodied? The legacy of Pocahontas, like that of the Grail itself, may be more complex and far-reaching than we have been led to believe. Her story, though often seen through the lens of colonial history, may be a story of hidden knowledge, sacred bloodlines, and ancient secrets, a story that is still waiting to be fully revealed. The death of Pocahontas in 1617 is often framed in mainstream history as a tragic end to a brief and tumultuous life. Yet, when viewed through the lens of deeper mysteries and esoteric traditions, it takes on an entirely different meaning. Pocahontas' untimely death, at the age of just 21, occurs at a pivotal moment in history, where the seeds of empire, colonialism, and religious transformation were being sown across the globe. But could there be more to her death than simply the result of illness or exposure to European diseases, as often suggested by conventional narratives? To understand this, we must explore the idea that Pocahontas' life and death were part of a much larger, concealed story, one tied not only to the geopolitical struggles of her time, but to hidden bloodlines and secret knowledge. The notion that Pocahontas's death marked the end of an era is, in a sense, true. But what if it also signified the beginning of something else? A transition that would ripple through time, affecting future generations who would inherit the mysterious legacy of her bloodline. The death of Pocahontas is shrouded in ambiguity. Some accounts suggest that she succumbed to a fever while aboard a ship, preparing to return to Virginia with her husband, John Rolfe. Other sources claim that she may have been poisoned, an idea that has been explored by various conspiracy theorists and esoteric writers over the years. Could it be that Pocahontas's death was not merely an unfortunate consequence of exposure to foreign diseases, but a deliberate act to silence her role in a much grander narrative? Was she, in some way, a threat to those who sought to control the secrets of the Grail bloodline, or to those who feared what she represented? A living link to ancient, hidden knowledge? To delve deeper into this possibility, we must consider the powerful forces that were at play in Europe at the time of Pocahontas's death. The 17th century was a period of intense religious and political upheaval, with the rise of secret societies, royal intrigues, and a growing interest in esoteric traditions. The Grail bloodline, believed by many to be the direct descendant of Christ, had long been hidden in the shadows, protected by a small but powerful group of individuals. These individuals were often members of secret societies, such as the Knights Templar, the Rosicrucians, and other mystical orders, whose members were dedicated to preserving ancient knowledge and guarding powerful legacies. Could Pocahontas's bloodline, through her connection to the Powhatan people, have been seen as a potential key to unlocking these ancient secrets? Was her marriage to John Rolfe part of a larger plan to safeguard this sacred bloodline? Perhaps through the English monarchy, which had its own vested interest in the preservation of royal bloodlines. The idea of Pocahontas being more than just a symbolic figure, and instead a direct link to an ancient, hidden tradition, challenges the conventional understanding of her life and death. The notion of secret bloodlines, particularly those associated with the Grail, has long been a topic of intrigue. Some scholars and esoteric thinkers believe that the descendants of Christ's bloodline were carefully hidden from the public eye, with their true identity guarded by a select group of powerful individuals. Over the centuries, these bloodlines have been intertwined with the histories of European royalty, noble families, and religious orders. If Pocahontas, through her connections to her father, Chief Powhatan, and the broader network of indigenous peoples, was somehow part of this hidden tradition, then her life and death would be imbued with far greater significance than we've been led to believe. This leads us to an important question. What role, if any, did Pocahontas play in the larger mystery of the Grail bloodline? Her presence in England, and her marriage to John Rolfe, may have been seen as a way to protect and preserve this ancient lineage. Pocahontas, with her unique position as both a native woman and a figure who had been symbolically transformed into a Christianized European, could have been viewed as the perfect vessel for this hidden knowledge. Her marriage to Rolfe might have been a way of integrating this knowledge into the growing colonial empire, ensuring its survival even as it remained concealed from the larger world. Moreover, the idea that Pocahontas's death was not merely an accident or the result of illness, but a carefully orchestrated event raises intriguing possibilities. The powerful forces that sought to control the Grail bloodline would have been acutely aware of the risks posed by Pocahontas's existence. She was in many ways a living representation of the merging of two worlds, indigenous and European, two ancient lineages that have been brought together through her marriage. If Pocahontas was indeed part of the Grail bloodline, or a vessel for its preservation, then her death could have been seen as a necessary step in safeguarding these secrets. But the mystery surrounding Pocahontas's death goes beyond the political and religious currents of her time. There are those who argue that Pocahontas' death marked a turning point in the hidden history of the Grail bloodline itself. If Pocahontas was, in fact, part of a larger esoteric tradition, her death could have symbolized the closing of one chapter in the story and the opening of another. Perhaps it was an attempt to bury her connection to the Grail bloodline, or to ensure that her legacy remained hidden from the public eye. The consequences of Pocahontas' death reverberated far beyond her immediate family and the English colonies. Her son, Thomas Rolfe, would later become an important figure in the colonial world, and his descendants would carry on the legacy of Pocahontas, though perhaps without fully understanding the true nature of the bloodline they carried. The mystery of Pocahontas' death, in this sense, becomes a story of lost knowledge, of a hidden legacy that would remain obscured for generations, waiting for those who were able to piece together the puzzle. Yet the secrecy surrounding Pocahontas' life and death also speaks to a larger narrative, one that connects her to the grand story of the Grail, of hidden bloodlines, and of ancient knowledge. While the mainstream history books may paint her as a tragic figure caught in the crossroads of colonialism, the deeper truth may be far more complex. Pocahontas' death may have been a deliberate act to sever the link between the known world and the hidden world of the Grail bloodline. In this sense, her story is not one of defeat or tragedy, but of profound mystery and guarded knowledge, still waiting to be uncovered by those willing to search for it. As we continue to look into the life and death of Pocahontas, we are left with more questions than answers. Her connection to the ancient bloodline, whether through her marriage or through her own lineage, suggests a hidden role she played in the larger narrative of the Grail and its protectors. Perhaps the story of Pocahontas is not over. Perhaps, like the Grail itself, her true legacy is still waiting to be revealed, hidden beneath the surface of history, protected by those who understand the importance of keeping its secrets. As we continue to explore the enigmatic life and death of Pocahontas, we encounter a recurring theme: the blending of two worlds, the clash of civilizations, and the hidden threads of ancient knowledge that tie her to a far-reaching esoteric tradition. The mystery surrounding Pocahontas' life, her marriage to John Rolfe, and her subsequent death offers a tantalizing glimpse into a narrative that has remained largely obscured by mainstream history. But when we pull back the veil, a much deeper and more complex story begins to unfold, one that connects Pocahontas not only to the colonial struggles of the early 17th century, but also to the much older, far-reaching legends of the Grail bloodline. To understand the true significance of Pocahontas' role in this hidden history, we must dive deeper into the larger mystery of the Grail itself. For centuries, the Grail has been seen not just as a physical object, but as a symbol of divine power and hidden knowledge. According to certain mystical traditions, the Grail represents the bloodline of Christ, those who are believed to be the direct descendants of Jesus Christ, hidden away from the prying eyes of history. The idea of this sacred bloodline, passed down through the centuries, is central to the Grail legend, and it is this very bloodline that many believe has been preserved and protected by secret societies and royal families throughout history. What makes the connection between Pocahontas and the Grail bloodline so compelling is the idea that Pocahontas, a native woman from the Powhatan Confederacy, may have been the bearer of a hidden link to this ancient, sacred lineage. To many, the blending of Pocahontas' indigenous heritage with her European transformation, her marriage to Rolfe, and her connection to the English monarchy forms a symbolic bridge between two worlds, one ancient, one emerging. Could it be that Pocahontas' life was a deliberate attempt to preserve this sacred bloodline, embedding it within the very fabric of European colonial society? At first glance, the idea of a Native American woman being linked to the Grail bloodline may seem far-fetched. However, when we consider the history of the Grail and the secrecy surrounding its guardianship, a different picture begins to emerge. The Grail bloodline, according to many sources, was not meant to be restricted to any one group or nation. It was a lineage that transcended borders, one that was hidden and protected by various individuals and families throughout history. The Templars, the Merovingians, the Visigoths, these are just a few of the groups that have been linked to the preservation of the Grail bloodline. And if Pocahontas' marriage to John Rolfe was part of a larger plan to safeguard this sacred legacy, her role takes on a new and much more significant dimension. The relationship between Pocahontas and Rolfe is crucial in understanding this larger narrative. While many view it as a simple act of diplomacy designed to ease tensions between the English settlers and the Powhatan Confederacy, there is a compelling case to be made that their union had deeper, more esoteric implications. John Rolfe was not just a tobacco planter. He was a man of connections, tied to the emerging power structures of the English Empire. His marriage to Pocahontas was more than a political convenience. It was the joining of two bloodlines, one native, one European. And in this union, one might argue, lay the potential preservation of an ancient secret, a sacred bloodline that had been carefully hidden from the world for centuries. The marriage between Pocahontas and Rolfe also plays into a larger theme that we see across history, one that is particularly significant in the world of secret societies. Throughout the centuries, marriage has been used as a way of consolidating power, preserving ancient knowledge, and ensuring the survival of sacred bloodlines. The marriage of Pocahontas to Rolfe was not just a symbolic act of peace. It was a powerful gesture embedding the sacred knowledge of the Grail bloodline within the very fabric of colonial society. This connection, whether intentional or not, could have been seen as a way of ensuring the survival of the Grail legacy, hidden from the eyes of the common people, but protected by those who understood its true significance. But what about the timing of Pocahontas' marriage and her subsequent journey to England? The year 1616, when Pocahontas arrived in England, was a pivotal time for secret societies and esoteric movements across Europe. The Rosicrucian manifestos, calling for the revival of ancient knowledge and the establishment of a new spiritual order, were circulating widely at this time. The Templars, although officially disbanded, were believed by some to have been operating in secret, their influence still deeply felt in the corridors of European power. Was Pocahontas' presence in England, at this critical juncture in history, part of a larger plan to safeguard and conceal the Grail bloodline from the wider world? The royal court of King James I, where Pocahontas was presented to the English nobility, was itself a hotbed of political and religious intrigue. Many of the figures in attendance at this court had connections to secret societies, royal bloodlines, and esoteric traditions. The marriage of Pocahontas to Rolfe, then, could be seen as an extension of this hidden world, an act that brought together the New World and the Old World in a symbolic union that had far-reaching implications for the preservation of sacred knowledge. Yet, even as Pocahontas' presence in England stirred intrigue among the powerful, her return to Virginia in 1617 and her sudden and mysterious death raises new questions. Some have speculated that Pocahontas' death, which occurred shortly after her return, was not a natural one. Could it be that her death was orchestrated to prevent her from revealing the true nature of her connection to the Grail bloodline? Was her death, in fact, a way to silence her and ensure that the secrets she carried would remain hidden for generations to come? This theory, though speculative, is supported by the larger historical context. The English, and especially the English crown, were deeply invested in maintaining control over powerful bloodlines and hidden knowledge. Pocahontas' life, and particularly her marriage to Rolfe, represented a delicate balance between the indigenous and the European, between the Old World and the New. Her death could have been seen as a way to close the door on any potential revelations about the Grail bloodline, ensuring that it remained concealed from public knowledge. In this sense, Pocahontas' life and particularly her death, takes on a much more profound and mysterious significance than we have been led to believe. Her legacy is not just one of cultural assimilation, colonial conquest, and religious transformation. It is the story of a woman who, through her bloodline, may have carried a key to an ancient and hidden tradition, a tradition that transcends time and geography, linking her to the Grail and to the great mysteries of the past. The story of Pocahontas is, in many ways, a story of lost knowledge, of hidden bloodlines, and of secrets that have been buried beneath the weight of history. But as we begin to peel back the layers of her life, we uncover a far more complex and fascinating narrative, one that suggests that Pocahontas's true legacy is still waiting to be revealed. And perhaps, just as the Grail itself remains hidden from view, so too does the true significance of Pocahontas's life, her bloodline, and the hidden traditions that she may have carried with her. In exploring the larger narrative of Pocahontas's life and death, it's impossible to ignore the profound symbolism surrounding her journey to England, her transformation from a savage native into a civilized Christian woman, and the deep ties her story has to the mystery of the Grail bloodline. But to truly understand why Pocahontas may have been far more than a symbol of European victory over indigenous cultures, we must examine the broader, often hidden context of her life, especially the historical and mystical currents that were at play during her brief time in the Old World. The early 17th century was a period of great transition. In Europe, the Renaissance had already sparked a resurgence in interest in ancient knowledge, and mystical and esoteric movements were becoming more organized. The Rosicrucians had published their manifestos in the early 1600s, calling for a rebirth of spiritual wisdom and a return to ancient teachings. The Catholic Church's power was still dominant, but secret societies, many of which had ties to the lost knowledge of the Templars, were gaining ground, promoting the idea that ancient bloodlines were the key to unlocking humanity's greatest mysteries. It was within this swirl of political, religious, and esoteric ferment that Pocahontas was thrust into the spotlight. When Pocahontas arrived in England, she was more than just an exotic curiosity. She was a symbol. But she was also a living testament to the clash of civilizations, indigenous traditions, and the burgeoning European colonial empire. In her appearance before the English court, she became the literal and figurative embodiment of a new world trying to fit into the old. Her Christian baptism, the renaming to Rebecca, her marriage to John Rolfe, all seemed to fit neatly into the narrative of European triumph. Yet, if we shift the lens from colonial politics to the much broader, mystical undercurrents of the time, we begin to see a very different picture emerging. The English court, ruled by King James I, was not just a political power center, but a breeding ground for esoteric movements. And for centuries, the bloodlines of European royalty had been tightly controlled. According to certain ancient traditions, these royal families were stewards of a hidden knowledge, the Grail bloodline. The idea that the Holy Grail wasn't just an object, but a lineage was embraced by many secret societies, especially the Templars, who had been rumored to guard the Grail and its secrets. The mystery of Christ's bloodline had long been a point of intrigue, with some claiming that it had been carried on secretly through royal families, especially in France and Spain. Could Pocahontas, with her marriage to Rolfe, have been seen as a way to integrate this sacred bloodline into the English royal fold, in a way that would make it both protected and hidden from the world? Pocahontas's marriage to John Rolfe in 1614 was not merely a peaceful gesture between two nations. To some, it was an act that carried with it deeper, more sacred symbolism. Rolfe, a man of modest means, had connections to the highest echelons of English society. His family and the family of Pocahontas became intertwined in a union that represented more than political convenience. The marriage could be viewed as the merging of two bloodlines, one native, one European. But what if that union was, in fact, a more calculated act designed to protect a powerful legacy hidden beneath the veil of colonial politics. Rolfe himself was involved in the early Virginia tobacco industry, which brought great wealth and influence to the English colonies. The role of tobacco in shaping colonial economics was undeniable, but the industry was also deeply enmeshed with the elite of Europe. Tobacco had connections to the mysticism of the period, as it was sometimes used in rituals and ceremonies, believed by some to carry spiritual properties. Was it possible that Pocahontas, by marrying Rolfe, was becoming part of a hidden agenda, a larger plan designed to keep the Grail bloodline intact and ensure its survival in the New World, far from the prying eyes of the church and the state? Moreover, it's crucial to recognize that the concept of the Grail bloodline goes far beyond mere political maneuvering. The idea that Christ's bloodline was preserved, not in a cup, but in the descendants of his family, is central to many esoteric beliefs. And during the 16th and 17th centuries, there was a resurgence of interest in these mysteries with powerful families, especially those associated with the royal houses of Europe, believed to be part of a secret network that sought to guard and preserve this sacred knowledge. Pocahontas, through her marriage to Rolfe, may have unknowingly become a vessel for these secrets, even if she herself was unaware of the role she was playing in this vast, hidden drama. Another layer of the mystery lies in the fact that Pocahontas's presence in England came at a time when the concept of the divine right of kings was still very much in play. This doctrine held that monarchs were divinely appointed and that their bloodlines were sacred. If Pocahontas was, as some suggest, a descendant of a hidden royal bloodline linked to the Grail, her very existence could have posed a threat to the established order. She was a living reminder of a more ancient power, one that transcended the crowns of Europe and could challenge the divine right that monarchs claimed. Was Pocahontas's role in the English court then part of a larger effort to neutralize this threat, to absorb her sacred bloodline into the New World Order, and to keep the secrets of the Grail hidden from those who might seek to unlock them? As we consider these possibilities, the question arises, why was Pocahontas, who had been so carefully presented as a symbol of the success of English colonialism, ultimately erased from history in such a decisive way? After her death in 1617, at the young age of 21, the historical narrative of Pocahontas became focused almost entirely on her role in facilitating peace between the English settlers and the Powhatan Confederacy. But in doing so, history failed to account for the deeper significance of her life, her lineage, and the hidden knowledge she may have carried. Her story became a footnote, a symbol of colonial success, and a tragic tale of assimilation. Yet what if the erasure of her true significance was itself part of the larger conspiracy to keep the secrets of the Grail hidden from the world? It is possible that Pocahontas's life and death were deliberately obscured because of the powerful forces at play behind the scenes. Her bloodline, and its connection to the Grail, may have been considered too dangerous to reveal, as it had the potential to shift the balance of power in both Europe and the New World. In this context, Pocahontas's life was not just a colonial story, but a chapter in a much older, more profound mystery, one that connects her to the very roots of Western esotericism and the ancient knowledge of the Grail. Her legacy, though hidden for centuries, may not be as lost as it appears. Just as the Grail has been pursued by countless individuals throughout history, so too might the truth about Pocahontas and her bloodline be waiting to be uncovered. The world may have dismissed her story as one of assimilation and colonialism, but for those who are willing to look beyond the surface, there are deeper truths hidden within her life and death, truths that are only now beginning to emerge from the shadows. As we continue to piece together the fragments of Pocahontas's life, her journey to England, her marriage to John Rolfe, and her eventual death in 1617, we begin to uncover a troubling pattern, the deliberate erasure of her true significance. Pocahontas's story, much like that of many other figures who have been caught in the crosshairs of colonial history, has been reduced to a simple narrative of cultural assimilation. Yet, the deeper we delve into her life, the more we see that she may have been part of a much larger, hidden agenda. Her role in the broader mystery of the Grail bloodline becomes clearer when we consider how and why history may have obscured her true legacy. The Grail, often seen in legend as a physical object imbued with divine power, also represents something much more profound: the bloodline that it is said to protect. This bloodline, according to various esoteric traditions, traces its origins to the descendants of Jesus Christ. However, the Grail is not just a symbol of religious lineage, but a metaphor for hidden knowledge, esoteric wisdom, and the secrets of humanity's true origins. It is a legacy that transcends time, one that is said to be safeguarded by various secret societies, royal families, and hidden custodians throughout history. The question we must ask ourselves is, could Pocahontas, a Native American woman who bridged two worlds, have played a role in protecting or even continuing this hidden bloodline? The story of Pocahontas' marriage to John Rolfe and the subsequent blending of their bloodlines is key to understanding the hidden narrative that runs beneath the surface of colonial history. Pocahontas' marriage was not merely an act of diplomacy between the Powhatan Confederacy and the English settlers. It may have been a strategic, even mystical, union designed to preserve an ancient bloodline. In the world of secret societies and esoteric traditions, marriage was often seen as more than just a personal bond. It was a way of consolidating power, protecting sacred knowledge, and ensuring the survival of important bloodlines. The idea of joining two families, one indigenous and one European, could have been seen as a way of protecting the Grail bloodline from the prying eyes of those who would seek to destroy or expose it. John Rolfe, a tobacco planter with connections to the emerging power structures in England, was a man of influence. His marriage to Pocahontas was politically advantageous, but also had a deeper significance when viewed through the lens of hidden histories. Could it be that Pocahontas, through her union with Rolfe, was positioned as the custodian of this sacred bloodline, ensuring its survival in the New World? After all, the marriage of Pocahontas to Rolfe was seen as a way of integrating the indigenous and the European. But could this integration have served a deeper purpose, one that involved the transmission of secret knowledge and the preservation of the Grail bloodline? In considering the possible connections between Pocahontas and the Grail, we must also examine the powerful networks of secret societies operating in Europe at the time. The 16th and 17th centuries were marked by the rise of groups like the Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and the remnants of the Templar Order. These societies, often shrouded in secrecy, were deeply concerned with the preservation of ancient knowledge, and many believed that they were the guardians of the Grail. If Pocahontas' marriage to Rolfe was a deliberate attempt to intertwine her bloodline with the powerful European elite, it is possible that she was viewed by these secret societies as a crucial link in the chain that would preserve the Grail bloodline for future generations. The significance of Pocahontas' journey to England cannot be overstated. In 1616, when she and her husband Rolfe arrived in London, England was a nation steeped in both political intrigue and spiritual curiosity. The court of King James I was a place where power and mysticism often intersected. It was a time when secret societies were beginning to assert their influence, and the idea of divine bloodlines and hidden knowledge was becoming more prominent. Was Pocahontas' presence at the English court merely a diplomatic gesture, or was it part of a much larger, more enigmatic plan? In the context of the growing interest in the Grail, the idea that Pocahontas was more than just a symbol of colonial triumph begins to gain traction. We also have to consider the possibility that Pocahontas was part of a larger conspiracy to hide the true nature of the Grail bloodline from the public eye. Throughout history, there have been many attempts to suppress knowledge that was deemed dangerous or threatening to the established order. In the case of the Grail, its knowledge was believed to have the power to alter the course of history. If Pocahontas' bloodline was indeed tied to this ancient legacy, then her death and the subsequent silence surrounding her legacy may have been part of a deliberate effort to keep this information hidden. The circumstances surrounding Pocahontas' death are mysterious and have been the subject of much speculation. After returning to Virginia in 1617, Pocahontas died suddenly at the age of 21, just a year after her marriage to Rolfe. Some historians suggest that she died from a lingering illness, while others claim she was poisoned or otherwise silenced to prevent her from revealing the true nature of her lineage. If Pocahontas' death was not natural, but orchestrated by forces within the colonial system, it would fit a pattern that we have seen throughout history. The silencing of individuals who held knowledge that was deemed too dangerous or too threatening to the established order. At the heart of Pocahontas' story is the question of what her legacy truly represents. Was she a mere symbol of colonial conquest, an exotic figure meant to serve the interests of the English settlers? Or was she a vessel for something much deeper, something hidden beneath the surface of history? The blending of her bloodline with that of Rolfe, the mystery surrounding her death, and the cryptic nature of her life all point to a larger, more profound narrative, one that connects her to the ancient and secretive tradition of the Grail. The true story of Pocahontas, then, is not just a tale of cultural assimilation or colonial conquest. It is a story of hidden knowledge, of sacred bloodlines, and of powerful forces working behind the scenes to protect and preserve the secrets of the Grail. Pocahontas' life was not merely a chapter in the history of European colonization. It was a chapter in the ongoing mystery of humanity's lost knowledge. And as we continue to unravel the threads of her story, we begin to realize that Pocahontas' legacy is far more significant than we have been led to believe. Perhaps, just as the Grail remains hidden, so too does the true story of Pocahontas, a story that is waiting to be uncovered by those willing to look beyond the surface of history. To fully understand the profound implications of Pocahontas' life and death, we must look deeper into the forces that shaped her destiny. On the surface, her journey from a Powhatan princess to a symbol of English colonial success may seem like the simple tale of an indigenous woman assimilating into European culture. However, as we explore the connections between Pocahontas, the Grail bloodline, and the powerful secret societies of her time, it becomes apparent that her story was anything but ordinary. What if Pocahontas' role in history was not just as an intermediary between two worlds, but as a custodian of an ancient and sacred legacy, a legacy that was destined to be hidden, protected, and even manipulated by those in positions of power? The early 17th century was a time of intense political and religious tension, with Europe divided along lines of Protestant and Catholic conflicts, as well as the growing influence of secret societies that wielded considerable power behind the scenes. These groups, many of which had roots in the Knights Templar and the Rosicrucian order, were deeply interested in preserving and protecting certain esoteric knowledge, which they believed was encoded within the bloodlines of royalty and noble families. The idea that a select group of individuals carried the knowledge of the Holy Grail was more than just a myth. It was a driving force for these secret societies, whose influence often extended into the highest echelons of European society. But why would Pocahontas, a woman from a native tribe in the New World, become so central to this hidden agenda? To answer that question, we must consider the symbolic significance of her life and the very nature of the Grail bloodline. According to certain esoteric traditions, the Grail is not simply a relic or an artifact. It is a living lineage, a bloodline that descends from Jesus Christ himself. This sacred line was said to have been passed down through generations of hidden descendants, many of whom lived in obscurity, far from the gaze of the church and the state. Some believe that the Grail bloodline carried with it knowledge of an ancient spiritual truth, one that had the potential to shake the foundations of Christianity and, by extension, the power structures of Europe. Pocahontas, through her marriage to John Rolfe, became part of a larger web of political and spiritual intrigue that sought to protect and conceal this hidden knowledge. The union of Pocahontas and Rolfe, while ostensibly a diplomatic alliance, may have been seen by certain factions as a way to bring this sacred bloodline into the fold of English royalty, thus safeguarding it for future generations. But this was not just a political maneuver. It was a spiritual and esoteric act, one that sought to preserve the Grail bloodline within a new geographical context, one far from the eyes of the Church and its dogma. The very nature of Pocahontas' role in the English court adds another layer of complexity to this mystery. When she arrived in England, she was not just a native woman. She was a symbol of the New World, a living representation of the potential for colonial success. Her baptism, her new Christian name, Rebecca, and her transformation from a savage to a civilized Christian woman were all carefully orchestrated to fit the narrative of English superiority. Yet, in doing so, the true significance of Pocahontas was hidden behind a veil of colonial propaganda. What if, instead of being a mere trophy of European conquest, Pocahontas was playing a much more significant role in a hidden drama that spanned continents and centuries? Her marriage to Rolfe, while framed as a diplomatic peace agreement, may have also been a strategic move in a larger game, a game that involved the protection and concealment of the Grail bloodline. If Pocahontas' lineage was indeed tied to this sacred bloodline, then her role in the marriage was far more than just symbolic. It was, in essence, a guardianship. Pocahontas was entrusted with carrying forward the sacred knowledge encoded in her blood, and her union with Rolfe was the means by which this knowledge would be protected, hidden, and, ultimately, preserved. This theory gains further weight when we consider the strange and somewhat mysterious circumstances surrounding Pocahontas' death. After her return to Virginia in 1617, Pocahontas died suddenly at the age of 21, just a year after her marriage to Rolfe. While some historians attribute her death to illness, others suggest that it was not a natural death at all. Could her death have been orchestrated to prevent her from revealing the truth about her bloodline? If Pocahontas was indeed a keeper of the Grail legacy, then her death could have been part of a larger effort to silence her and ensure that the secrets of her lineage remained hidden. The timing of Pocahontas' death is also curious. She had just returned to Virginia after spending a significant amount of time in England, where she had been presented as a symbol of the success of English colonialism. Her death, so soon after her return, raises questions. Was she truly the victim of illness, or was her death a calculated move to prevent her from ever speaking out about her true heritage? The silence surrounding her death, and the fact that her story has been relegated to a mere footnote in the history of European colonization, suggests that powerful forces worked to ensure that the true significance of Pocahontas' life would remain hidden. At the heart of this mystery lies the question of why Pocahontas' story has been so thoroughly obscured. The Grail bloodline, if it exists, represents a potent and dangerous knowledge, one that could potentially alter the course of history. The idea that Pocahontas was a part of this lineage would be a revelation that could destabilize the historical narrative, challenging the very foundations of colonialism, Christianity, and the power structures that arose in the wake of European expansion. For those who stood to gain from maintaining the status quo, it would have been imperative to keep Pocahontas' true significance hidden. In this light, Pocahontas' story is not merely one of colonial conquest and assimilation. It is a story of hidden knowledge, of ancient bloodlines, and of the forces that conspired to protect that knowledge from being exposed to the world. Her legacy, obscured by centuries of colonial history, is waiting to be rediscovered, waiting to reveal the secrets that have been hidden for so long. As we peel back the layers of her story, we begin to see that Pocahontas was far more than a symbol of cultural integration. She was, in fact, a key figure in a much larger, more profound mystery. The truth of Pocahontas's connection to the Grail bloodline may still be buried, but it is not lost. It waits, like the Grail itself, to be uncovered by those who are willing to look beyond the surface of history and embrace the deeper truths that lie hidden beneath. The journey to uncover Pocahontas's true legacy is not just a journey through the past, but a journey into the heart of one of history's most enduring mysteries, the mystery of the Grail and the bloodlines that have carried its secrets through the ages. As we continue to untangle the threads of Pocahontas's life and her connection to the Grail bloodline, we are confronted with a deeper question that challenges the way we understand history. If Pocahontas was, indeed, a key figure in safeguarding a sacred lineage that stretches back through time, how is it that her true significance was obscured for centuries? The history that we have been taught, one built on the premise of colonial expansion and cultural assimilation, does not leave room for the possibility of a hidden bloodline that transcends national and racial boundaries. Yet, the more we explore the fragments of Pocahontas's life, the more we see that her story is intertwined with a mystery that defies the conventional narratives of colonial history. The concept of the Grail bloodline, a secretive and powerful lineage that traces its roots to the sacred blood of Jesus Christ, has been a central element in esoteric traditions for centuries. Throughout history, various secret societies have sought to protect and preserve this bloodline, believing that it contains profound spiritual and mystical knowledge that has the power to change the course of human history. The Knights Templar, the Freemasons, and the Rosicrucians, among others, have been at the forefront of this effort, guarding the secret of the Grail and the sacred bloodline that it represents. The question is, how does Pocahontas fit into this web of hidden history and clandestine guardianship? When Pocahontas arrived in England in 1616, she was presented not just as a civilized native woman, but as a symbol of the success of the English colonial project. Her appearance at the court of King James I and her subsequent baptism were public acts meant to demonstrate the triumph of European culture over the so-called savages of the New World. Yet, there is something undeniably strange about the way Pocahontas was treated, both by the English and by the historical record. She was a young woman, far from her homeland, living in a foreign land among people who saw her as both a curiosity and a political asset. But could she have been something more? Something that transcended her role as an exotic symbol of colonial conquest? In a world of secret societies and esoteric traditions, the idea of bloodlines and the passing down of sacred knowledge was paramount. The Grail bloodline, according to some theories, was not just a physical legacy, but also an esoteric one, passed down through generations of select individuals who were entrusted with the protection of ancient spiritual wisdom. Pocahontas's marriage to John Rolfe, while initially appearing to be a simple diplomatic arrangement, may have been a strategic move to intertwine the Grail bloodline with the powerful forces of European nobility and colonialism. By marrying Rolfe, Pocahontas may have become a key figure in the preservation and protection of this sacred lineage, even if she herself was unaware of the full extent of her role. Rolfe, a tobacco planter and a member of the English colonial elite, was far more than just an ordinary settler. He had connections to influential families in England and was well-versed in the political dynamics of the time. His marriage to Pocahontas was not only a diplomatic gesture, but also a way to strengthen his own position within the colonial system. But could it be that Rolfe's marriage to Pocahontas had a more significant purpose? Was he aware that Pocahontas's bloodline carried with it an esoteric knowledge that could alter the course of history? Or was he simply a pawn in a much larger game, one in which Pocahontas's true role was to protect a sacred legacy, one hidden from the public eye? The fact that Pocahontas' journey to England and her marriage to Rolfe took place at a time when secret societies were gaining influence in Europe is not a coincidence. The early 17th century was a period of intense spiritual and political upheaval, with various groups vying for control over both the physical and spiritual realms. The Rosicrucians, for example, were active during this time and were deeply interested in the preservation of ancient knowledge, particularly knowledge that could be traced back to the Grail. These societies believed that the Grail represented a hidden truth, one that could reveal the true nature of humanity's origins and unlock the mysteries of the universe. If Pocahontas' bloodline was indeed connected to this knowledge, then her presence in England could have been seen as a significant event, one that threatened to expose the secrets that these societies had worked for centuries to protect. But why then was Pocahontas' story buried so deeply? The answer may lie in the nature of the power structures that were in place at the time. The English colonialists, the church, and the state were all deeply invested in maintaining a particular narrative, one that justified the conquest and subjugation of indigenous peoples. The idea that Pocahontas was not simply an innocent victim of colonialism, but a key figure in the preservation of a sacred bloodline could have been seen as a direct challenge to the status quo. To reveal the true significance of her role would have been to challenge the entire foundation of European colonialism and Christian doctrine. Furthermore, the timing of Pocahontas' death raises further questions. After returning to Virginia in 1617, Pocahontas died suddenly at the age of 21, just 1 year after her marriage to Rolfe. While many historians have attributed her death to illness, there are those who believe that she was poisoned or even murdered to silence her and prevent her from revealing the truth about her bloodline. The circumstances surrounding her death, along with the lack of detailed records, suggest that powerful forces may have been at work to ensure that Pocahontas' legacy was buried. The idea that Pocahontas was deliberately silenced ties into the larger narrative of hidden knowledge that, if revealed, could have shifted the balance of power in both the Old World and the New. In the centuries that followed Pocahontas' death, her legacy was further obscured by the forces of colonialism and cultural assimilation. Her story was reduced to a simplistic narrative, one that emphasized her civilization and her role as a bridge between the English settlers and the indigenous peoples. But what if the true story of Pocahontas, as a custodian of the Grail bloodline, has been hidden in plain sight all along? What if her marriage to Rolfe was not simply a political act, but a crucial moment in the preservation of an ancient and powerful legacy, one that was meant to be passed down through the generations? As we continue to peel back the layers of history, we must ask ourselves, what other secrets are hidden within Pocahontas' story? Could it be that the key to understanding the true nature of the Grail bloodline and its connection to Pocahontas lies not in the written records of history, but in the spaces between them, the silences, the omissions, and the deliberate distortions of the past? The truth of Pocahontas' life and her role in the Grail mystery may still be buried, but it is there, waiting to be uncovered. The quest to uncover her true legacy is, in many ways, a quest for the lost knowledge of humanity itself, knowledge that has been guarded, hidden, and protected for centuries. The mystery surrounding Pocahontas' life and legacy continues to unfold as we explore the unseen forces that shaped her fate. Despite the mainstream narrative, which often reduces her to a mere symbol of colonial diplomacy, there are compelling signs that her story was much more complex and much more significant than we have been led to believe. The key to unraveling this mystery lies not just in the events of her life, but in the symbolism that her life and death embody. Pocahontas, with her unique position at the crossroads of two worlds, may have been caught in a much larger web of hidden history, one that extended far beyond the shores of the New World and reached deep into the heart of European occult traditions, secret societies, and royal bloodlines. One of the most intriguing aspects of Pocahontas' story is the peculiar nature of her marriage to John Rolfe. While historians often frame this union as a simple diplomatic alliance, the timing and circumstances suggest that it was a much more significant event, both politically and spiritually. Pocahontas was not just a foreign princess being saved by English colonialism. She was, according to some esoteric traditions, a woman with a bloodline that connected her to a mysterious and ancient heritage. Her marriage to Rolfe could very well have been a strategic move, one that ensured the survival of this sacred lineage in a world that was becoming increasingly hostile to indigenous cultures and beliefs. The Grail Bloodline, in particular, has long been a subject of fascination and speculation. According to the myths and traditions surrounding the Grail, it is not simply an object or artifact. It represents a living bloodline, one that traces its origins back to Jesus Christ and the ancient teachings of the Essenes. This bloodline, which is said to have been passed down through generations of noble families, contains within it the knowledge of a hidden truth, one that could, if revealed, transform the course of history. The notion that Pocahontas might have been a descendant of this sacred line is not just a fringe theory. It is one that has been explored by scholars and esoteric researchers alike, all of whom point to the strange and mysterious circumstances of her life. Why, then, has this theory been so thoroughly dismissed by mainstream historians? The answer lies, perhaps, in the power dynamics of the time. The 17th century was a period of intense religious and political conflict, particularly between the Protestant English and the Catholic European powers. The Church, which held considerable sway over both the spiritual and temporal realms, was particularly keen to suppress any notions that challenged its authority. If Pocahontas was indeed connected to a bloodline that carried ancient, potentially subversive knowledge, then her story would have represented a direct threat to the Church's narrative and its control over European society. Furthermore, the rise of secret societies, particularly the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, and the Knights Templar, during this time provides another layer of intrigue to the Pocahontas mystery. These societies, which often operated in the shadows of official history, were deeply invested in preserving ancient knowledge that they believed had been passed down through select bloodlines. Some of these secret societies even believed that the Grail bloodline, in particular, carried a divine secret that could reshape the world. If Pocahontas' bloodline was indeed linked to this ancient heritage, then her life and death would have been of great interest to these groups, whose influence stretched into the highest echelons of European nobility. The fact that Pocahontas' marriage to Rolfe took place at a time when these secret societies were gaining influence cannot be overlooked. Was Rolfe himself aware of the true significance of Pocahontas' bloodline? It's possible that he was. Rolfe, after all, was no stranger to the complexities of the English colonial system. He had connections to the powerful Virginia Company and was well versed in the political dynamics of the New World. He also understood the importance of securing his position within the colonial elite. But could it be that his marriage to Pocahontas was not just a diplomatic act, but one that involved the protection of a secret far older and more significant than anyone realized? As we continue to examine the events surrounding Pocahontas' life, we see that there are numerous unanswered questions. Pocahontas' sudden death at the age of 21, shortly after her return to Virginia, is particularly suspicious. Mainstream historians attribute her death to a sudden illness, but there are those who believe that she was murdered or poisoned to silence her and prevent her from revealing the truth about her bloodline. After all, Pocahontas had been in England for a time, living among the powerful and influential, and could have learned something about her heritage, something that might have led her to question her role in the larger scheme of things. Her death, occurring so soon after her return to Virginia, raises the possibility that it was not an accident, but part of a deliberate effort to erase her from history. One must also consider the role that the English colonial agenda played in suppressing Pocahontas' story. The English colonists had a vested interest in portraying Pocahontas as a symbol of their success in civilizing the indigenous peoples of the Americas. The narrative of the noble savage was a convenient trope for justifying the colonial enterprise. By reducing Pocahontas to a mere symbol of cultural assimilation, the English could erase the complexity of her true role in history. The idea that she might have been connected to an ancient and sacred bloodline would have posed a direct challenge to the colonial narrative, one that sought to portray the indigenous peoples as primitive and in need of European guidance. In the centuries since Pocahontas' death, her story has been reimagined in numerous ways. Her image has been appropriated, romanticized, and distorted, often to serve the interests of those in power. From her depiction as a symbol of colonial conquest to her portrayal in modern popular culture, Pocahontas' true legacy has been obscured by layers of historical revisionism. But as we peel back the layers, we begin to see that Pocahontas' life and death were not simply a product of colonialism. They were part of a much larger, more complex story. A story that involves hidden bloodlines, secret societies, and ancient knowledge that has been passed down through the ages. The implications of Pocahontas' connection to the Grail bloodline are far-reaching. If the theory is correct, then Pocahontas' life represents a key moment in the preservation of this sacred legacy. Her marriage to Rolfe, her time in England, and her mysterious death were all part of a larger effort to safeguard knowledge that, if revealed, could have altered the course of history. The question now is, what does this mean for us today? What hidden knowledge might still be out there, waiting to be uncovered? And, more importantly, what can we learn from Pocahontas' story if we are willing to look beyond the surface of history and embrace the mysteries that lie beneath? Pocahontas' true legacy, it seems, has been buried in plain sight, concealed by centuries of colonial propaganda and historical distortion. But as we continue to dig deeper into her story, we begin to see that the truth of her life is far more extraordinary and far more significant than we have been taught. The Grail bloodline, far from being a mere legend, may be one of the key threads that connects Pocahontas to the larger narrative of human history. And as we uncover the secrets of her life, we also uncover the hidden truths of our own past. As we venture deeper into the enigma surrounding Pocahontas, we begin to realize that her story is not just one of cultural clash and personal tragedy, but also a tale laced with hidden symbolism, secret societies, and spiritual mysteries that extend far beyond her time. The more we explore the connections between Pocahontas and the Grail bloodline, the more it becomes apparent that her life was not merely a historical footnote, but a pivotal moment in a much larger and far-reaching cosmic drama. The question then arises, how can we explain the strange, almost mystical elements that pervade her life? Was Pocahontas merely an innocent victim caught between two opposing worlds, or was she a key player in a game far more complex? One that involved the preservation of sacred knowledge and the protection of an ancient bloodline? One of the most puzzling aspects of Pocahontas' story is the manner in which she has been portrayed throughout history. Her image has been manipulated and reshaped in countless ways, often to fit the needs of those in power. Early American historians and colonial figures sought to present her as a symbol of the triumph of European civilization over the so-called barbarism of the Native Americans. This simplistic narrative, which has been perpetuated for centuries, strips Pocahontas of any real agency or complexity. She is often depicted as this savage princess who was civilized by the English settlers, an archetype that both erases her true story and justifies the colonial exploitation of indigenous peoples. But as we dig beneath the surface of this colonial myth, we begin to uncover something much more profound. Pocahontas was not just a noble savage or a civilized Indian. She was a woman who navigated an extraordinarily complex and dangerous world, one in which her every move was laden with both political and spiritual significance. Her marriage to John Rolfe in 1614, often viewed as a diplomatic gesture, may in fact have been part of a much larger cosmic design. In marrying Rolfe, Pocahontas may have been uniting two vastly different worlds, but more than that, she may have been preserving a hidden bloodline, one that connects her to ancient secrets, esoteric knowledge, and the legendary Grail. The theory that Pocahontas was a key figure in safeguarding the Grail bloodline is not simply a fanciful tale. It is grounded in an understanding of ancient European traditions and the role of secret societies in preserving hidden knowledge. The idea of a bloodline carrying sacred wisdom has been a central tenet in many esoteric schools of thought, particularly within the traditions of the Knights Templar, the Freemasons, and other occult organizations. These groups, with their deep ties to both the Catholic Church and European royalty, believe that certain families carried within them the knowledge of the Grail, a spiritual inheritance passed down through the ages to protect humanity's deepest secrets. What if Pocahontas, through her marriage to Rolfe, was unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, part of this ancient and powerful tradition? One of the most interesting facets of the Pocahontas story is her time spent in England. In 1616, Pocahontas traveled to London, where she was presented to the English court as a symbol of the success of English colonization. She was paraded before King James I and the aristocracy, a curious spectacle for an indigenous woman from the New World. Her baptism and subsequent presentation as Rebecca Rolfe, a civilized Christian, were meant to show the English public that this savage could indeed be transformed into a loyal subject of the crown. This, of course, was part of the colonial agenda to present the conquest of the New World as a mission of benevolence and civilization. However, there are deeper, more unsettling questions that arise when we consider the true nature of Pocahontas' visit to England. Could it be that Pocahontas was not just a symbol of colonial success, but an emissary of something far more ancient, an emissary of the Grail bloodline, carrying with her knowledge that was far too dangerous for the powers of her time to acknowledge openly? Her presence in England during a period when secret societies like the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons were beginning to gain influence is particularly significant. These societies, with their esoteric teachings and secret rituals, were deeply interested in preserving ancient knowledge and guarding the sacred bloodlines that held the key to that knowledge. Was Pocahontas' role in this hidden network of spiritual guardians being manipulated by these powerful groups? While Pocahontas' time in England is often framed as a diplomatic mission, it is possible that her role was far more clandestine. She may have been seen as a key figure in a broader, more mystical scheme, one in which her very existence was tied to the preservation of the Grail bloodline. Her journey to England may have been the culmination of a much longer process of initiation into the secrets of this ancient heritage, a process that began long before she ever set foot in London. There is even speculation that Pocahontas may have been aware of her role as a guardian of the Grail bloodline, or at least unconsciously drawn into the web of occult forces that surrounded her. When we examine the circumstances of Pocahontas' sudden and untimely death at the age of 21, we are confronted with yet another layer of mystery. After returning to Virginia from England, Pocahontas' health rapidly deteriorated, and she passed away under mysterious circumstances. While it has been commonly attributed to a sudden illness, the timing of her death raises more questions than it answers. Could Pocahontas have been silenced by the powers that sought to control her and the secrets she carried? Was her death part of a larger effort to ensure that the Grail bloodline remained hidden from the world, locked away in the shadows of history? The story of Pocahontas' life and death, then, is not just the story of a woman caught between two worlds. It is the story of a much larger cosmic struggle, one that pits those who seek to preserve ancient knowledge against those who seek to suppress it. Pocahontas' role in this drama is central, and yet her true significance has been lost to time, buried beneath layers of historical revisionism and colonial propaganda. As we peel back the layers of her story, we begin to see that the real mystery is not just her relationship with John Rolfe or her role in the early days of American history. It is the hidden legacy that she carried, one that links her to a sacred tradition that has been passed down through the ages, safeguarded by those who understood its true power. What, then, can we learn from the life of Pocahontas? What does her story have to tell us about the nature of history, of knowledge, and of power? In many ways, Pocahontas' legacy is a reminder that the stories we are told, whether in history books or in popular culture, are not always the whole truth. There are always hidden layers, always secrets that remain concealed, waiting to be uncovered. The story of Pocahontas, with all its mysteries and unanswered questions, is a testament to the power of silence and the importance of uncovering what has been deliberately hidden. And as we continue to explore the forgotten corners of history, we may begin to understand that the truth, in all its complexity, is never as simple as it appears on the surface. As we continue to peel back the layers of Pocahontas' story, it becomes clear that there's a much deeper narrative at play, one that ties her to the larger currents of power, esoteric knowledge, and the hidden forces that shaped history. While mainstream historical accounts have often marginalized Pocahontas, reducing her to a mere footnote in colonial history, the truth of her significance may lie far beyond what we have been told. Her story, filled with symbolism and mystery, resonates through time, calling us to question the narratives we have accepted and urging us to look beyond the surface. In examining Pocahontas' life and legacy through the lens of the Grail Bloodline theory, we are forced to confront the uncomfortable reality that history has been manipulated, certain truths deliberately obscured, and powerful bloodlines hidden in the shadows. Her connections to secret societies, ancient traditions, and the political struggles of her time reveal a woman who is far more than just a symbol of colonial diplomacy. Pocahontas was a key figure, a conduit between worlds, whose true significance may only be fully understood when we allow ourselves to venture beyond the confines of conventional history and explore the mysteries that still lie hidden. In this closing revelation, all the fragments of history, myth, and speculation converge into a single luminous thread. The story of Pocahontas is no longer seen as a colonial romance or political gesture, but as part of an ancient design, a merging of sacred bloodlines across oceans and eras. Her union with John Rolfe becomes symbolic of something larger, the blending of the old world's mystical traditions with the new world's spiritual innocence. Through her descendants, whispers of divine ancestry and forgotten covenants echo through generations of American families, shaping ideals of destiny and liberty in unseen ways. Whether or not a literal Grail lineage survives in blood, its essence endures in the collective myth that still guides humanity's search for unity. The forbidden connection between the daughter of a Powhatan chief and the encoded Grail traditions of Europe suggests that the Grail was never meant to be found, but to be lived, carried quietly in the hearts of those who bridge worlds. In the silence between facts and faith, Pocahontas becomes more than legend. She becomes the vessel of a timeless promise, that the sacred always finds a way to continue. As the rivers of Virginia whisper to the wind, the story settles into stillness. History becomes breath, and myth becomes memory. Pocahontas is no longer a figure of legend, but a living symbol of unity, the bridge between spirit and earth, between what was and what might be. The Grail she carried was not a relic, but the enduring pulse of renewal within humanity. Her legacy drifts through time like a gentle current, unseen yet eternal, reminding us that the sacred blood of harmony still flows, waiting quietly in every heart that remembers.